I think we have folks here. Recording is going to start now, and then we can get started with the meeting. So, quick recap, taking it from the top. I think our focus, as always, for the last few months has remained on three things. First one is permissionless hubs, which makes it so that anyone can spin up a hub without needing a whitelist or any special permissions that you have today. The second focus is permissionless signups. So anybody can join the network without having to go through Warpcast or without having to go through a single client. And the last one is going to be features, where we're actually working on features that expand the functionality of the hubs. So those are the three main things. We expect permissionless hubs to come in August, permissionless signups to happen sometime by the end of Q4, and some feature work to happen between now and then. And once this is all done, Farcaster is fully permissionless. Anyone can sign up, anyone can run a hub, anyone can join the network, and it's going to be very open for folks to join and configure. Before we get to talking about what we're doing and how we've made progress in those three areas, I want to touch on two things happening in the ecosystem, which may be useful for devs. So the first one is Naynar has been building services to replace Warpcast APIs and offer hubs as a service. So today, if you go to Naynar, you can spin up a hub very easily by paying a fee. And they're also working on API compatibility with Warpcast. And our mental model over time is Warpcast doesn't want to be in the API business. And so once we have partners in the ecosystem that are actually offering APIs that are fully compatible, Warpcast APIs will likely be end of life, and everyone will be transitioned over to that. So if you're using Warpcast APIs today, please talk to Manan, who's on the call today, or Rish, who you can find on Farcaster, and figure out how that can help. In addition, Airstack's also been launching a bunch of tutorials to read and augment Farcaster data. The link's in the meeting notes, but you can kind of click in, and they've got a lot of great tutorials on how you can augment Farcaster accounts with data about POAPs, NFTs, and other things that you might want to do in case you're displaying this in your own applications. So two things that might be very useful for developers today. All right, let me jump straight into permissionless hubs, which is going to be the first main topic. So our goal is by the end of this month to actually get to a stage where hubs are permissionless. Aditya, who's not on the call today, has been working a lot on getting hubs scaled up. So the way we've been thinking about this is we've designed a suite of tests for what we call 10x scale, which is taking everything that's happening on the network today, multiplying it by 10, simulating it, and seeing what happens to hubs in those environments. The biggest thing we found, the biggest roadblock, was that signing was very, very slow. And so we've actually added some Rust code into the critical paths to handle signing, which has actually caused a significant speed up in hubs all over the board. So if you install the latest release of hubs, which will come out sometime this week, sync is going to be about 2x faster. So previously it took about 2 hours to sync a hub. It's now going to be down to 1 hour. And we expect more improvements to come over time. So we're benchmarking everything that's happening in sync, everything that's happening in gossip, and everything that's happening over APIs to find and fix bottlenecks. And we're optimistic that by the end of this month, we'll reach a point where hubs are going to be really, really stable, and we can open it, and there's going to be no more allow list, and everybody can just hit a button, spin up a hub, join the network, and start getting hubs to work. So we're excited to see that launch. To set expectations, I think it is likely that once we launch hubs, we may see some stability issues, especially if somebody spins up 100 different hubs and the network hasn't seen that load before. We're trying to test as much of it as we can, but realistically, there's some things that are going to be difficult. So expect some stability issues after we launch that for a month or so that we'll respond and react to, and we'll be very aggressive at pushing out fixes. So if you're operating one hubs or many hubs and care a lot about stability, we'll work very closely. We'll try to do the best we can to get you through this period, but expect a little growing pains once we go fully permissionless. Cool. Any questions on anything that I just covered, three hubs? Nope. Okay, great. The next thing I want to talk about is permissionless signups. So two things. We are working on two features actively that are going to lay the foundation for getting to permissionless signups. So the first is flexible storage. So what this is going to do is, right now you have to be invited to Farcaster. And the way it's going to work once we're on mainnet is anyone can sign up to Farcaster, but you have to pay a fee to get your data stored on hubs. And this fee is going to be set to $5 for the smallest unit of storage. You can buy as much storage as you want. So there are no more limits. If you want to pay more, you can store larger and larger amounts of history. So it's going to give users a big feature that they've asked for, and it's also going to lay the foundation for getting permissionless. This has been fully implemented. We're holding back the release until we're closer to hubs. You can click on the spec and read the details. It's been in review for a week, so if there's no further objections in today's call, I'm going to move it to finalized by the end of this call. The second piece is on-chain signers. So this is something we talked about, and it's in draft version, and Sanjay is working on the implementation today. But the way on-chain signers work is you're going to be able to make a transaction to set a signer on-chain, which then delegates permission to an application to sign messages on your behalf. This solves a bunch of user experience problems that we ran into with off-chain signers, where app developers were running into a lot of consistency issues, creating more and more signers as people were adding more and more applications. So we hope this is like a big level up to the user experience, and we've added a bunch of smart contract code to make this easier to set up, especially when you're first getting signed up for the network. So those are the two big features that we're trying to land. We expect them to kind of go out in the next release. And then the team is entirely focused on the mainnet release from now until that happens, which we expect to be sometime in October or November. So to give you an overview of how we're going through this process of getting to mainnet, just as it affects your applications, the first thing we're doing, we just kicked off an audit of the new version of the contracts today. So everything that we talked about with storage, on-chain signers, that's been effectively finalized and is going through an audit as we speak. Once the audit is done, we're going to deploy those contracts, and then we're going to shift all of the hubs, all of Warpcast applications, everything over to those contracts, and we're going to reseed all of the data. So what that means is if you have data and it's currently on the old contracts on L1 Gurley, we're going to pause registrations for about a day. We're going to migrate everything over to the new contracts, and then we're going to turn it back on. So everyone who's currently registered on the network right now, you preserve your FIDs, you preserve your F names, you preserve everything. There's no material impact other than new users can't sign up for the period of like half a day to a day when we do this initial migration. Once that's done, we kind of move into testing phase. We expect to run into issues. And so we will wait for a few weeks, track all the issues, fix them up in our contracts as necessary, and redeploy them. So we're hoping that this first deployment happens in September, the second deployment and second migration happens in October, and after that, we'll reach high confidence that, hey, the new contracts are working, these are the final L2 contracts, and sometime after that happens, we'll actually open up permissionless signups. It might take a day, it might take a week, we're not really sure at this point. So we expect sometime in October when we're finally on mainnet to turn on permissionless signups. Two things for app developers. One is we will have a migration guideline. So I think there'll be two things that matter. One is if you're reading from smart contracts, you will have to cut over reading to the new smart contracts on the same day that we cut over. And so we'll communicate this early. So for whatever reason, you're listening directly to events emitted by the smart contracts. You previously would have listened to them on Gurley. You'll now be listening to them on L2. Same thing with hubs. Hubs are going to cut over from listening to the old contracts to the new contracts. So we'll have to do a migration around the same time. We'll try to make that all programmatically work within the context of an upgrade. So ideally, as long as you're just running the latest version of the hub, there should be no action that you need to take. But we'll publish a guide that walks through all of the steps, and we'll ping anybody that is running older versions of the hubs just to make sure they all get upgraded. So that's it. To recap, we expect this month to be audit and preparation, next month to be doing one mainnet deployment, which we consider our test deployment to make sure everything works, migrate all the users, and then migrate everyone again to a final deployment. So there'll be 2 migration checkpoints, and then we're on mainnet, and then everything is going to be open and permissionless for people to sign up. All right, I talked for a lot there, but I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions on any of the timelines, mechanics, or any concerns with this. Cool, Manan, you had something?
Yeah, any decision on the L2 as well as how are you thinking about like the spam prevention problem with permissionless signups?
Yeah, good question. So we touched on this last meeting, but the L2 that we've landed on is OP mainnet. So that's where we're going to be deploying our contracts. To talk about spam prevention, I think there's going to be 2 ways in which we think about this. I think you can get rid of 80% of just permissionless spam by having a sign up fee that's calibrated to some amount. You don't want the fee to be too high to keep away legitimate users, and you don't want to keep it too low to encourage spammers. So we've set this fee to $5. So if you pay $5 when you sign up for new users, what's going to happen is you get roughly about 15,000 messages worth of storage. The storage spec has all the details of how that's partitioned across messages, and then you'll be able to use the network. Two things. One, all existing users are going to be migrated with 2 free units of storage. So at least for the first year, everyone's going to have the same, actually slightly more capacity than they have today. So everyone's messages are going to be preserved. For new users signing up, they're going to have to pay from scratch. And that's going to deter, call it 80% of spammers. For the remaining 20%, I think you're still going to see some amount of people who are willing to pay the fee, who are willing to join and continue using the network. The first lever is we can actually tune that dollar amount. We don't know if $5 is the right amount. We don't know if it should be $1 or $10. This is a good starting hypothesis, but we will tune that number as we go to make sure that we're catching as much spam early on with the fee model as possible. Secondly, Warpcast is going to start investing at the client level in more spam detection and prevention. We've seen a lot more of it happening over the last week or so, and so we're getting a lot more heuristics. I think the reality is this last part is going to be a cat and mouse game. People are going to change the way they spam, the way they join the network, the way they post messages, the mechanisms of spam, right? Are you spamming with casts? Are you spamming with likes or replies or something else entirely? And so I think Warpcast will be working a lot on developing heuristics, and we're going to see what we can do to make it as easy as possible for new developers building applications to build on top of that. And so either exposing some of those through APIs, making guides so people can implement their own system, or even coming up with a way to share some of that data with other application developers. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think the reality of it is there's no one size fits all solution. There's no like one thing we can build that will stop spammers. It's going to be a continually evolving process that exists for as long as Farcaster is around. Cool. Any other questions on this? Okay, great. I'll flip over to features. So the big feature that we shipped, last time we did this call, ENS usernames had launched on the protocol, and now they've actually launched in the Warpcast app. So using Warpcast, you can set ENS usernames, and these will show up on the protocol. Just as a quick recap for everybody building applications, the way Farcaster works is 2 usernames. Everybody can get an F name, which is an off-chain ENS name that's free to register. And then if a user has an ENS name that's pointed to their off-chain, their connected address or their primary address in Warpcast, they're then allowed to set that name as their primary username in Farcaster. And that's propagated across the protocol. So if you look at hubs, you'll be able to see 2 things. You'll be able to see all the names that someone has, like all the names that they have ownership over, and what they've set as their current name, which is saying, hey, this is the one that I want to use as my name right now. The one thing to keep in mind, if you're developing applications, it is very possible for a user to not have a currently set name. There's a few cases where this can happen. One is the user is a developer, they actually talk directly to hubs and delete that entry, and they don't have a name. 2 is the user had it previously set to an ENS name. That ENS name now no longer resolves to this address, and so therefore they no longer have a valid username. So app devs do need to handle the case where some user does not have a name currently set, and you can display their FID, which is what the Warpcast app does, or handle it in whatever way you'd like. But that's one thing we want to make sure that people are thinking about as they're designing their systems, because it's not 100% guarantee that you'll have a name set, though right now 99.9% of users have it set because that's the default experience Warpcast gives you, and that gives you the best display experience and lets people tag you on the network. We don't really expect to be doing any more feature work. The whole core Farcaster team is now heads down on just getting to permissionless mainnet. So I don't think we have a lot of room to introduce new features at this stage. We'll kind of pick that up again once we get to October and November, and we have a little more bandwidth to start implementing some of this stuff. So we'll encourage people to submit FIP, submit ideas, all of this stuff if you have them. We just don't expect to make any significant progress on anything outside of the mainnet migration for the next 2 months. That said, the 2 ideas that we want to get out there that people have been asking about that are top of mind for us once the migration is done is application identifiers and login with Farcaster. So application identifiers, the general idea behind them is when you set up a signer, So let's say a user has a Farcaster account, they sign into your application and they want to start using it. Right now, the signer has this like loose thing called a label, which says, hey, this is the app that created me. Now, anyone can fake it. Like I can go and set this to Warpcast, or I can set this to Jam, or I can set this to Discover, and there's no verification that it actually came from Discover. But what we're going to do is propose a standard where when you are asking for a signer, you as the application can provide a signed message that proves that you asked for it. So you can actually get credit for all of the messages assigned by a user. And this is useful for a bunch of reasons, right? One is it helps understand what applications are getting used on the network. Two is if you're a legitimate, well-behaved application, others might use your signal to like boost your users' casts over casts from other applications that are malfunctioning or not working very well. And so there's a lot of reputation that you can start to accrue from setting up signers with valid application identifiers. So we have a rough idea for how this could work, and we'll probably have a spec out there, and we'll hopefully implement it closer to the end of this year. The second idea, and this is actually something that people have been asking for a lot as well, is the idea of login with Farcaster. So the experience is I have an app. The app is unrelated to Farcaster. It doesn't actually post to the network or do anything from the network, but I would like the user to be able to log in using their Farcaster account, just like you can log in with Google to any one, one of many SaaS applications today. And so the idea behind this is there's a standard by which you can give the user a prompt. They can click on it. They can request a signature from the Farcaster wallet. And you as the app, once you get that signature, you can say, okay, great. I know that you're Dan Romero with FID number 3, and we will let you log into the application and use stuff. So it's entirely an off-chain standard. It actually technically doesn't influence the hubs or the contracts in any way, but it's just a standard for apps to request credentials from wallets. And so that's another thing that we'll prioritize. So hopefully we'll get those two done by the end of the year once hubs are permissionless. All right, that's all I had in terms of updates and what the team is working on. I want to turn it over to the group and see if anyone has questions that we have not discussed that would be worth talking about on this call. I'll give it another minute before I move on. Okay, sounds like no major questions beyond anything that we've discussed. So we'll move to shoutouts and help wanted. So shoutouts, one, a big thank you to Hirsch, who's actually done a lot of work on helping with signature verifications in ID registry. So he actually proposed a change that allows us to now support FIDs that are held in smart contract wallets by doing verification of 1271 signatures. So you can now have your FID in a smart contract wallet and have it work, which is awesome. So we've got that in for this audit, and hopefully that will be shipping soon. The 3 areas that we could use help, if anyone wants to contribute to Farcaster, there are 3 projects that are actually meaningful for us right now. The first is exploring rewriting our test framework from Jest to Vitest. We've done that with a bunch of other applications. It's actually worked really well. There's a lot of nuance with our tests since we do both Rust and TypeScript tests to actually get all of this working. But if someone's interested in exploring and helping us make that jump, would love to chat with you. Second is upgrading libp2p. We're on an older version of libp2p. Actually need to make an upgrade, test it, and run it against a newer version of hubs. And the third is if you're a Solidity developer who wants to help us review the smart contracts, we could always use another set of eyes, especially for security vulnerabilities. So again, if you're interested in that, DM me and happy to help get you set up with the new versions of the contracts to review. Those are the 3 things we could really use help with if anyone is interested. Cool. And that kind of brings us to the end of today's meeting. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you here in another couple of weeks. And if anything comes up in the meantime, the Farcaster dev channel on Telegram is the best place to ask questions. Talk to you all soon.